الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Nukhbatul Fikr or Nukhbatul Fikr by Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah. And we have mentioned before that many of the ulama, they have many works that have been done around this particular book, and of those many who have explained this book, and also many and some also have made a talkhis, a summary of this book Nukhbatul Fikr. So we have been working or discussing, studying one of the talkhis, one of those who have summarized the book of Nukhbatul Fikr, and that summary was done by one of the Mashaykh of contemporary, or Shaykh Omar Muqbil, Hafidullah Ta'ala. So you refer to, or titled is Talkhis, Nukhbatul Fikr, and we have been going through this particular work within the topic of Ilm al-Mustalah al-Hadith. So today, inshallah ta'ala, that will be picking up from where we had stopped in the last lesson or session, where we had covered matter regarding a hadith, as the author mentioned, Hadith al-Gharib. So we discussed matter pertaining to Hadith al-Gharib, and before this we have covered Hadith al-Mashhur, Hadith al-Aziz, and third Hadith al-Gharib, where those three categories of hadith, or those three types of hadith, that they form what is referred to as a Hadith al-Ahad. So the author Rahimullah Ibn Hajar, that he started his book first by mentioning of the different types of hadith, those hadith that looking at hadith first by way of how it have reached us, by looking at the isnad as to the amount of narrators inside of the isnad. So if there's many narrators within the isnad from start through to the end, then that hadith in general is referred to hadith al-mutawatir. Then he mentioned the next category of hadith, which is said to be hadith ahad, where you find that the number of narrator in each of the isnad, that they're limited. So those limits, it may vary, and that would decide as to what label will be given to that particular type of hadith. So mashhur, as we mentioned, 3 or more in the least that is found in any of the level of the hadith, but have not reached the level of mutawatir. Then he discussed hadith al-Aziz. So hadith al-Aziz, you find only a few narrators, or 2 narrators, or 3, as Jumhur of the ulama take that position, that if the least amount of narrators that are found in any of the levels of hadith, they are referred to as Hadith al-Aziz. Then if there's only a single narrator in any of the level of the tabaqat, or the level of the tabaqat of the isnad, then it will refer to as Hadith al-Gharib. So we discussed concerning those matters, and today inshallah ta'ala, then the author will be moving to a next type of hadith, now of hadith, which is Hadith al-Sahih. So Ibn Hajar rahimullah, that he mentioned regarding Hadith al-Sahih, he gives its definition and then discuss different points relating to Hadith al-Sahih. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll be mentioning what have been mentioned in this book. So they mentioned concerning al-Qismal, regarding concerning hadith, by looking at hadith by way of the grading of the hadith being graded as being authentic or not. Then this is a very important part of ilm al-hadith. So studying of hadith, this is one of the very important aspect in this study regarding ulum al-hadith. So they'll look at hadith regarding the hadith being maqbool or the hadith being mardud. So maqbool, the hadith, it reach a certain standard that is considered to be acceptable, and if the hadith is mardud, then it fail that standard. So as for what is mentioned here by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, as in this muqtasar that they mention regarding, where he state wal qabl ahad, that as for hadith al-ahad, بنقل عدل, that it is narrated. So hadith al-sahih, as he mentioned, that it is بنقل عدل, it is transmitted by a credible individual. تام الضبط, the narrator is of complete precision in his narration. متصل السند, the isnad is connected, is as a complete connected isnad. غير مؤل ولا شاذ, and also it is not mu'al, it has no defects, hidden defects, and also wala shad, and also there is nothing which is irregular about the hadith. There is nothing which is irregular or odd regarding the hadith. Then he mentioned huwa hadith lidhati, and this is said to be hadith sahih, huwa sahih lidhati. This is said to be hadith that is authentic based upon its own criteria, based upon on its own. So this is the highest, or one of the higher degree of hadith as-sahih, where hadith to sahih is of different levels. So he mentioned the highest level. So this is a general definition of what is said to be hadith to sahih. But before we discuss this matter, just wish to bring to our attention a matter where that the ulama of hadith and the ulama of Islam, that they start to critique of hadith from a very early time in Islam. So if we look at the history regarding when this process it started, that Imam Muslim rahimahullah, that in his Sahih, in the Muqaddimah, in the introduction, that he mentioned al-Athar and Muhammad ibn Sirin. And Muhammad ibn Sirin rahimahullah, that he died 110 al-Hijri. So of those that he mentioned regarding concerning Muhammad ibn Sirin, that from the Kibar al-Tabi'in, from the Kibar al-Tabi'in, that it is stated that it is said regarding that this process it started, and the reason behind this process of checking and verifying hadith that is attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, that they mentioned that during that time of the era of the Tabi'in, that you find that al-bidah start to become somewhat more widespread. So things of acts of deviation and people trying to support and to validate their deviation, that they start to use hadith, that they would fabricate and weak hadith so as to give some justification for their al-bidah. Then also you'll find that regarding concerning that people become more relaxed regarding narration of hadith. Also people start to add things regarding hadith. So because of these reasons, then the ulama during that time start to start to form a process regarding verifying of hadith. So they mentioned Ibn Sirin rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned regarding this process and why it started, قال لم يكونوا يسألون عن الإسناد, that before they would not ask about isnad, and that he's speaking of the Sahaba. So during the time of the Sahaba, they would not per se question isnad. That he mentioned فلما but said so some question with some verification occurred, but then he mentioned that كانوا لا يسألون عن الإسناد, they would not ask about isnad, but the verification of the Sahaba time was more so regarding the matan. So the verification of the Sahaba was more so the matan, not per se the individuals. So they mention فَلَمَّا وَقَعَتْ الْفِتْنَةِ, that when the fitna appear, قَالُوا, then the people start to say سَمُّوا لَنَا رِجَالُكُمْ, then they also ask, name to us the people who are a part of the ones who have narrated this isnad, this hadith. فَيَنْظُرْ إِلَى أَهْلِ السُنَّةِ, so they will look to the people of Sunnah. فَيَأْخُذْ حَدِيثُهُمْ, and they will accept their hadith, meaning that the people of the Sunnah, that they fulfill certain criteria, so they will accept their isnad. Then they mention فَيَنْظُرْ إِلَى أَهْلِ الْبِدَةِ, then they will look to the people of bidah, and based upon this they mention فَلَا يُؤْخَذْ حَدِيثُهُمْ, they will not accept their hadith. So it shows regarding concerning that this narration of Ibn Sirin in Sahih Muslim, in his Muqaddimah, in his introduction, it kind of give us some insight into this process of verifying, checking of hadith that is started early, in the time of the Tabi'in, of the students of the Sahaba, the era after the Sahaba. So it shows regarding that this process started early, and it also started to be developed even more so after that time. So based upon this, that it reached a stage with ulama that they add a definition, start to give a clear definition, criteria as to what is said to be hadith sahih, those hadith that we can accept, hadith al-maqbul. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he mentioned a summary of what is given by those who precede him regarding what is defined as hadith sahih. So he mentioned these criteria by stating that it is a khabar, that is a hadith, binaql ad, that the narrators who have transmitted this, they are said to be adl, or trustworthy. Second, he mentioned tam adapt, that they are of the highest level of preciseness in their memory of the hadith. Third, muttasil al-isnad, that isnad, it is muttasil, it have a continuous chain up until the Prophet ﷺ. Then he mentioned or to whoever غير And fourth, he mentioned that it is free from any form of hidden defects. Then he mentioned fifth, wala shad. And also there is no contradiction, or there is no irregularity in the hadith, or contradiction or oddness in the hadith. So these are the criteria. And so this is the definition of what is said to be hadith. You have, that's the definition that he gave. I would say a summarized definition compared to those who proceed before. So you have of the ulama who have given definition of hadith. So also what we might find, or to be aware of also, that Ibn Hajar, that definition as we mentioned, others preceded Ibn Hajar in giving a definition, but maybe not to the same wording, but the same meaning. So you find that Ibn Salah have given a definition of hadith in his book Al-Muqaddimah Ibn Salah. Also you find others who have done so. So of the early ones before those of Ibn Salah in the 6th century, also Ibn Hajar who came after, then we find the likes. So before that time, others who have given definition of hadith sahih. So to show that the ulama have given some attention to this matter by giving some guidelines as to what type of narrations are accepted. So they have mentioned regarding concerning that of those who have preceded, of those who have given like a definition of hadith sahih, that they have mentioned, for example, Imam Shafi rahimahullah. So Imam Shafi in his book Al-Risala, which is a book that discussed concerning, as they say, one of the early books in Usul al-Fiqh, that he discussed concerning hadith, and also in this book Al-Risala that he outlined some criteria as for what for hadith sahih, hadith maqbul. So Imam Shafi rahimahullah, that he mentioned regarding that a criteria for hadith to be accepted, he mentioned this in his book Al-Risala. So if one was to go back to the book of Risala of Imam Shafi rahimahullah, the book is printed, that you'll find that he give us a guidelines or a definition or a criteria for the acceptance of hadith. And also others have preceded Imam Shafi rahimahullah, or others also that you find that Abu Bakr al-Humaydi, that also have given a definition regarding hadith being accepted. Also find Ibn Khuzaymah, who have also done the same. Al-Dhuhali, as they mentioned, that Al-Hafiz Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Dhuhali also have given a criteria mentioned, لا يجوز الاحتجاج إلا بالحديث موصول غير المنقطع الذي ليس فيه رجل مجهول ولا رجل مجروح. So al-Dhuhali rahimahullah given us some type of guidelines regarding how to detect, or what are the criteria that should be fulfilled for hadith to be deemed as accepted. We mentioned لا يجوز, it is not permissible for one to use as an authority a hadith إلا hadith that is موصول, that it is as a complete chain, غير المقطوع, there's no breakage, الذي ليس فيه رجل, also there's no rajul regarding the rajul, majhul, that the person is not said to be unknown, ولا رجل مجرور, and a person also who is not critiqued, a person who is not criticized. So those are some of the criteria regarding of the ulama mentioned regarding hadith sahih, and others who are followed. So this shows regarding concerning that, as for the criteria for hadith being authentic, that this is something the ulama from before have looked at, from the early scholars. And we'll find the ones who came after them, the likes of Ibn Salah, the likes of Ibn Hajar, and others, that they have given us only a summary. They have just summarized what was mentioned before by the ulama who preceded them. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned regarding concerning this definition, where others mentioned that huwa hadith sahih ma naqala al-adl dabit, that al-hadith sahih as well has been transmitted by a narrator who is said to be adl, trustworthy, tam ad-dabt, that of precise memory, muttasil al-isnad, that isnad is connected, min awwalihi ila akhirihi, from the start through to the end, wala yakuna shadh, and also it is free from any form of hidden defects or any form of irregularity. So those are the definitions. So that is the general definition of hadith sahih. And this hadith is hadith bidhatihi, hadith sahih bidhatihi. So this is the definition of hadith as-sahih as outlined by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala. So I find a little slight difference in some of the wordings of Hadith Sahih, but generally it revolves around the definition given by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala. And the definition given by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is the standard that is used up until today, in most part. So the standard that is followed and used regarding Hadith Sahih is the one given by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala. So in discussing concerning Hadith Sahih, we have given the general meaning. So it pivots around 5 main points as well outlined. So after those points regarding the ulama, after giving a definition of Hadith Sahih, at times you might find a difference in certain wording. That some might use the word, adopt, meaning the person's level of accuracy in his memory, and some might use the word, let's say the person, mutqin, that the one who says mutqin. So you have different, slight difference in some time used by the ulama regarding wordings, but the meaning is generally the same. So as for now, giving some further clarity on the definition of a Hadith Sahih, ijmalan, now we'll go through, and the word Sahih, linguistically, we said linguistically it means did as-saqim, wal maksur. So Sahih, linguistically, it has various meaning of those meaning. Did the Saqim, so something is not Saqim like Sahih, Marid, that a person, something which is not like ill, or something which is broken, Maksur, Kasr, that's Sahih, linguistically. Also, the meaning of Sahih is here, Bara'atun, or Al-Bara' min kulli aib, something which is free from any form of deficiency. So, as-Sahih, when that thing, it is free from deficiency. So the next of the matter regarding Hadith Sahih, but we have clarity that the ulama will mention regarding that with Hadith Sahih, that there's shurut Hadith Sahih, that Hadith Sahih, that it has certain condition. If these conditions are fulfilled, then the Hadith is graded as Sahih. So I mentioned these condition and also some clarity as to what is intended and meant by these conditions. So shurut Hadith Sahih, that there are 5 conditions. The 5 conditions are as follows. 1, adalatul ruwat, that the narrators in the hadith are all said to be of adala. We'll discuss as what is meant by adala. So said it's in a person of a certain level of credibility and standing. Second, dabt al-ruwat, that the second condition is that all the ruwat, the narrators, that they should be of a certain standard regarding their level of retaining of that information, which is their level of memory of the hadith. And we'll discuss concerning adapt or itqan. We'll discuss that matter further. The third criteria is ittisal as-sanad, or let's say muttasal as-sanad, that isnad, it has a unbroken chain, so it has a connected chain from start through to the end, meaning from who the person narrate, the first narrator through to the last person. Then the fourth criteria for Hadith Sahih, salamat min shudhud, that hadith should be free from any form of shudhud or adam shadh, shudhud. The hadith, it is free from any form of, as we mentioned, the word, we said linguistic, we'll discuss this further regarding a shudhud wa shadh, as to what is meant and intended. So that irregularities. The hadith is free from any form of irregularities or anything which is odd. And the fifth criteria of Hadith Sahih, salama min al-illat al-qadiha, that it is free from any form of illa, some might say khafi, qadiha, that the fifth criteria, the hadith, it is free from any form of illa, defects, but they mention khafi, that they are very that these things are not easily detected, and also it is qadiha, and also it is something which has a negative impact on the hadith, that it will cause the hadith to be daif. So it has to be free from these form of illa, which is qadiha, that will have a negative impact on the hadith. So these are the 5 criteria that must be fulfilled. So when a person who's grading hadith, then he has to go. That's it. We mentioned that these are just the criteria mentioned in general, but there's a full process in ensuring that these criteria are met for the hadith to be deemed as authentic. So it's not just knowing the criteria, it's knowing the process. And that are those people who specialize in the field of hadith. So just also to bear in mind that we mentioned there's 5 criteria. Some have mentioned a discussion regarding these 5 criteria that they agreed upon by al-hadith. But some may mention 4, where they mention that there are 4 criteria that they mentioned. The first, which is adalatul rawat, the credibility, understanding of the rawat, the narrators. Second, dabt al-rawat, the narrators are of good memory, precise memory, keen memory, they are sharp in their memory. Third, ittisal as-sanad, that the chain, it is connected from start till end. And they mention that the 4th, those who say it is 4, that they include, they mention salama min illat al-qadiha. They mention that salama min illat qadiha, that they mention will include also that shudud is a form of illah. So they mention that shudud, hadith saying to be irregular or odd, is a form of illah, is a reason to have a negative impact on the hadith, is a reason to remove the authenticity of hadith. So that's what the word. So they said illah would include shudud. They have said illah salamtu min shudud, that as shudud is a form of illah. So shudud is a form of illah. So they said that. So you have that discussion, but for clarity that they have mentioned regarding that, shudud is a type of illah, and illah is qadiyah, khafiyah. They see it as separate. So those who separate between both, and those who see shudud as being a part of illah. So that's concerning. So majority follow the concept of the 5 conditions, and we'll follow that concept to make things clearer. So regarding concern these matters, regarding now outlining a little more detail as to these 5 criteria, what is actually intended by these criteria, and what is actually meant by these criteria. So the ulama, so the first of those that they mentioned is adala. So we'll start off with ittisal as-sanad. We'll start off with ittisal as-sanad. So of the first of the criteria, ittisal as-sanad, that the isnad must be of an ittisal, so a connected isnad. And ittisal as-sanad from the start through till the end. As for ittisal as-sanad, that what is meant by ittisal as-sanad? What is meant by this, an yakuna kullu rawi, that each narrator, and could be male or female, said kullu narrator min al-riwat, so each narrator, whether male or female. So they mention that as I mentioned that kullu rajul, that they mean that by way of aghlabiyya. So the riwat are not only male, but also we have female riwat. But yes, majority of the narrators, the riwat, that they are male, but there are female narrators. So when I use the word may or rajul or rijal, that means by aghlabiyya, by the most. Not that they are the only ones. That's not the case. So ittisal as-sanad, what is meant by this, an yakuna kullu rawi min al-rawat, that each narrator from amongst the narrators, min rawat al-isnad, narrated of the isnad, akhada hadith mimman fawqahu, that each person in the isnad, that he have received the hadith from the person above him, mubashir, in a way which is direct, bisiga min sigat tahammul maqbula, in a way which is, he received the hadith which is a way which is accepted by the way hadith is transmitted, by way of transmission of hadith. So meaning that everyone have received the hadith, and this at times could be that you heard the hadith. So what is meant, so the definition of ittisal as-sanad is that each person have receive the hadith from the person before him, ahead of him, in a way which is acceptable by way of the rules of transmission of hadith. Where the rules of transmission of hadith could be the person have heard directly, where it could be he heard the hadith, or he may have, or he read the hadith upon the teacher, or he heard it from the teacher, or it was in a book that was given to him. So it's not all the time is direct hearing of the hadith, but at times transmission is by way of written form. So it could be written or it could be verbal. So that's concerning the first matter regarding ittisal al-sanad. So the mention regarding ittisal al-sanad is that each person heard from the person, acquired a hadith from the person ahead of him, from his teacher, until it reached the Prophet ﷺ. Also with ittisal al-sanad, the second criteria is that the person, as we mentioned, that the person also, he named the person he received the hadith from. The second of the criteria, ittisal al-sanad, is that the person must name the person he received the hadith from. So the person mentioned the person that, so you have to give the name of the person from whom he received the hadith. So you have to give a name. If he does not give a name, then the hadith, then that ittisal will have a problem. That will become a problem in the isnad. So it mentioned as a person has mentioned, so he has to give the name, so we know exactly, it is known exactly whom he received the hadith from. So we can verify also that person credibility. So that's the first of regarding ittisal al-sanad. So ittisal al-sanad, the person of the criteria, that the person, ittisal al-sanad, that he received the hadith. So some say man sami'a, man fawqahu, but some use the word more, man akhada al-hadith. Some say akhada. So as I mentioned, it could be by you hearing verbal, or it could be by you, by something being recorded. So it's not all the time the person hearing, but it could be at time the person, something being recorded, the person, he read from the person's book. It was given to him. So that's concerning of that matter to be mindful of regarding ittisal al-sanad. So it could be mukataba, something that is recorded, written. So that's concerning ittisal al-sanad. So receive the hadith in a way which is within the criteria of transmission amongst the ulama of hadith. Second of ittisal al-sanad, that the person also, he named the person he received the hadith from. He named the person from whom he received the hadith from, or that narration. So that's concerning ittisal al-sanad. And that will be from the start, for example, from Imam Bukhari up until the Prophet ﷺ. That you have to name all the people from start to end. Abu Dawood, he will list the names of the so any who is a collector, then he has to name all the narrators in that isnad for that hadith. So that's concerning ittisal al-sanad. What will be in contrary to ittisal al-sanad, that there's a inqita, that is a form of breakage in the isnad. And the form of breakage it is, as we'll discuss, that there are different types. So it could be at the start of the hadith, the end of the hadith, the middle of the hadith. All of this is a form of breakage. So any form of breakage in the isnad, adam al-ittisal, then the hadith, so sukut or rawi or akthar. So if one narrator is missing or more, then the hadith is said to be adam al-ittisal. Then it is not said to be a connected isnad. So that clarifies, so as we will discuss regarding the different types of inqita and the different of breakage that occur in the hadith, that will be discussed separately, inshallah ta'ala. So you have names that will come up regarding mursal, murasil, munqata, mu'dal, mu'allaq, and the likes. So those are indicators that there's an inqita, a breakage or breakage in the isnad. So that's the first criteria. That's the first criteria. As we mentioned, ittisal as-sanad. The second criteria for hadith to be authentic, they mention adalatul rawat. Adalat al-rawat. So adalatul rawat, which is the level of the narrator have to be a certain standard, and they have to have adala. So there must be of a certain criteria, the narrator, of a certain standard regarding their level of practice of Islam and their level of credibility. So this is of the factor that has to be taken into account regarding the narrators. This is also regarding the narrators. So they mentioned regarding concerning adalatul rawat. So all of them have to be of that standard, of that criteria, of credibility. So adalatul rawat, as I mentioned, adala al-rawat, that what is meant by adalatul rawat. You have different definitions that are given that adalatul rawat, that you have a munaqasha, like a discussion on this particular point of adalatul rawat. So try to be patient with us as we explain. So in general, adalatul rawat, like in the books of hadith, amongst them Ibn Hajar rahimahullah and others, when they discuss adalatul rawat, that they'll mention regarding adalatul rawat that they'll say malakat tahmal الراوي أو صاحبها على ملازمة التقوى والمروءة. So they mention that the person who has salamatul rawat, they mention the person that who's upright, the person who is disciplined, where he is able to remain upright or carry out acts of taqwa, upright in doing acts of obedience, and also of the that is free from odd traditional practice. It does not go outside decent practice. So that is what they refer to as adala. So it is the person who's up, the person who is firm in upholding or discipline in upholding piety, acts of piety, and he has decent, upright practices. Of some of the mashaykh of contemporary, of some of the ulama, of some of those who have somewhat, they mentioned that definition that is, we said, given in some of the books of hadith, amongst them Ibn Hajar and others who have given this definition, that I mentioned that definition is more in line with the definition of the ulama of usul al-fiqh wal-fiqh. So adala, that is given a definition in some of the books of mustalah that we have just mentioned, is more so a definition given by the ulama of usul al-fiqh wal-fuqaha, in how they perceive or what they define as adala. ملكت تحمل صاحبها أو صاحبها على ملازمة التقوى وسلامة من والمروءة. So that's the definition that they mention is two parts, that a person have the ability to uphold things of piety, and second, he uphold things of traditional decent practice. That's the definition they normally give when they mention adala. But say that that definition, if the ulama mention that, you'll find, for example, the ulama is attributed to Imam Shafi rahimahullah, that and others who have mentioned regarding concerning adala, as in the framework of the ulama of hadith, when they look at a narrator, that they mention man ghalaba alayhi attaha lillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala wa rasuluhu alayhi salam, that is that adala is the person by way of, they mention that a person that what is display in most part obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the Prophet alayhi salam. From what is apparent. From what is apparent. So they mention that that is adala. So of those who have mentioned adala, istiqamah, for the person to be upright, istiqamah to ar-rawi, for the narrator to be upright, fi zahir, in what is apparent outwards, ala ta'atillah, upon obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa rasulihi, and to his messenger alayhi salam. That is adala. So adala, istiqamah, ar-rawi is where the narrator is upright on obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from what is apparent, from what we see from his apparent actions and behavior, that is obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is adala. So when I mentioned that Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah mentioned concerning, so of those who mentioned adala, so they're going to go to concerning of the books of some of the books of usul of ulum al-hadith, mustalah al-hadith, that they'll go into explaining what is meant by adala, who said in most part regarding using the definition, some will use the definition of the ulama of usul al-fiqh, then they kind of went on to explain this. So they mentioned regarding concerning that this matter, that the person of adala, istiqamah ala deen, where the person is upright upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wajtinab, irtikab, al-kaba'ir or mufassiqat, that he tries to avoid things of acts of fisk, of doing kafil al-kabahir, such as doing acts of major sin, wa adam isra al-kabahir, ala saghair, and the person is not consistent in carrying out acts of small sins. So that's the definition by giving Musadna, but that's what said, that definition is more in line with the people of usul al-fiqh. But the ulama of hadith more give a more clear definition suited to their science, but it will include the person that certain points. So that's concerning what is mentioned as adala, what is mentioned as adala. And then they will mention regarding shurut adala, shurut al-adala. So this person said to be of adala, it will include, so let's mention shurut al-adala. That will include for the person one, shurut al-adala, for a person said to be adl as a narrator. Then these are the criteria he has to fulfill. One, he has to be a Muslim. So that narrator who's described as having adala, he has to fulfill these criteria. One, be a Muslim. That will exclude a kafir. And these second, baligh, he has to be above the age of puberty. Third, aqil, of sound mind, exclude a person who is not of sound mind. Fourth criteria, salim or salama min asbab al-fisk, that also is free from things of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Acts, he has to be free from things of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the deen of Islam, which would be the person not involved in doing things of major sins, or the person is known that is constantly involved in a particular minor sin. And the fifth, khawarim al-maru'a, that also is not attacked, but also is free from any form of indecent practice, traditional practice. So they mention maru'a, by way of this is maru'a, in relation to how the person in his behavior, is his actions and behavior in line with what is said to be decent practice. So these things sometimes are upright moral practice, where sometimes, and traditions, where these things may not be against Islam, may be mubah, but considered to be not a befitting practice. Such as a person that, for example, that a person may eat standing in the middle of the market. Some may see that as not a decent practice, not something which is an accepted practice for a person to be eating in the middle of the street, in the middle of the market. So said those things go back to that's some of the ulama mentioned that also this maru'a, is it really a criteria or not? Some may argue whether this also, but is traditionally in books of hadith is not something that is often something used against the narrator. Even though they may mention it, but it's not used often against the narrator. Not many are criticized for this, but some may, but not many. So these are in general what they outline as being the 5 criteria or shurut: adala, Muslim, that will exclude non-Muslim; balig, that will exclude a person who's a child; aqil, sound mind, that will exclude the one who's not well mentally; 4th, salim min al-asbab al-fisq, the person have to be free from involvement in things of sinful deeds and acts; and the 5th, khawam al-murwa, the person that is known for decent practice and not indecent traditional practices. But they're also with these criteria that they are criteria for ada, not for ta'ammul. So the ulama of hadith, they have 2 terminology regarding ada, that these criteria is used or looked at when the person wish to transmit that hadith and yarwi hadith. When he knows now to pass on that hadith to others, then he has to fulfill, as for his adala, these criteria will be taken into consideration. But while tahammul, while he is receiving the hadith, then these criteria are not a must. These criteria are not a must. So a child can receive a hadith, but when he wishes now to transmit it, then he has to be of the age of puberty. So those are those things that are discussed regarding the criteria of adala. Also, to add to this adala, that this rule is followed regarding all the narrators except for 1 category of narrators. And the ones who are exempted regarding matter relating to scrutinizing their adala, the Sahaba. So anyone who's considered or confirmed to be a Sahaba, a Sahabi, then his adala is automatically intact and not criticized. But for everyone else, we have to affirm his adala. Everyone else, then his adala has to be affirmed. So that's concerning of those matters. There are things others that are covered in this particular discussion, but we'll leave it at that. We leave it at that. So when a person mentions adalatul rawat, then these are the things that one have to factor. What is meant by adala? What are the criteria for the person who's described as being adl, a just person in hadith? What is meant by this? What is meant by this? So now you have some who have discussed in depth this particular matter regarding adala, based upon one that the definition that is given of adala in most part is a definition given by the ulama of usul al-fiqh, but the ulama of hadith that may look at adala regarding from their line of studied or field, which is, as they mentioned, that as we said, كل مسلم مكلف سالم من أسباب الفسق والخروء المروءة. That's the general definition that is given of adala. And they discuss regarding of the thing they discuss regarding this matter regarding that even matter regarding what is said to be asbab al-fisq. Certain majors, certain sins, is it major or minor? Sometimes you have that discussion between the ulama. What sins are said to be major and minor, some that are agreed upon, and some are under discussion, contention between the ulama. Is this classed as a major sin or a minor sin? So That's of those matters. But overall, those are the general points regarding adala. So then also our next discussion regarding adala, turuq, which will discuss, they will discuss more at length in the field of jar wa ta'dil, regarding they discuss concerning kayfa ta'rif adalatur al-rawi. How can I affirm the adala of a narrator? We have the criteria, but how do I affirm it? Especially those people who come long after. How can I confirm this matter? How do I know that the person fulfilled these criteria? So they mentioned that of a ways to know and confirm the adala of rawi bitansis a'imma. So for us in our time, how can we affirm this to a person? They mentioned tansis min a'imma al-mu'tadilin. So looking at concerning what have been said by that person of the ulama of the past, of his time. If they have somewhat affirm is adala, then that's something to start with. Then that is something to affirm is adala, because those of his contemporaries of their imma have already stated that a person is of such and such standing regarding his deen. So tansis a'imma al-mu'tadilin mimman yu'tamad qawluhu. So an imam of the past that is balanced, and also his statements are taken. So that imam, his statements are taken, is taken into consideration. A person might be a person of ilm, but his statements are not taken into consideration in certain matters. So regarding concern that, so finding those people of the ulama of hadith, jihabidha, the kibar ulama of hadith of that time, who they are the ones when they speak on matters, then people listen to what they say. Also, ash-shuhra wa istifada. You can know of a person, adala, a narrator by way of, as they mention here, shuhra, the person become very famous. Wa istifada, well known. Is fame as being of those that well known a person of Sadul ulama. Then this become also of those things that can be used. And also the ulama has spoke well about him. He is known to have sat with the ulama. He is known to have traveled with ulama. So, and he have been praised by the ulama. So this become of those things that can be used to confirm the person adala. He is known to the ulama. That they are spoken with that. They are spoken where? They are spoken well of him. That he has known to have sat with them, regarding study with them. He has known to travel, seeking knowledge from the ulama. So these are ways to confirm the person's adala. Or at times, we'll find that a narrator that those who are a particular narrator that is known that he does not narrate except upon people who are said to be thiqat, that people are trustworthy. So you might find a narrator, some of the rawat, certain of the imma, some of the great scholars of Islam, that according to their criteria of the thing that they are very meticulous about, only narrating from people who are said to be trustworthy. So when those people who have that standard narrate upon certain individual, then that gives us a sense that those people are of a certain standard, of their adala is up to they are of a certain reputation, because particular individual do not narrate except upon people who are of a high standard. So when we find such a person narrating upon that person, then that gives us a sense that that person is one that is of high standing. So you find they mention regarding that of some of the ulama who have that standing, or have that type of criteria, that there are certain standard that are certain criteria. Of them they mention Ash-Shu'bah, Malik, Ismail ibn Abi Khalid, Sha'abi, Sulaiman ibn Harb, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Ibn Mahdi, Jarir ibn Hazim. So those are imma, that they are the criteria that will only narrate upon people who are reliable. So when they narrate upon a person, then that give a sense that that person is reliable and credible. So those are ways regarding that matter. So this also shows regarding the Talib al-Ilm, also regarding concerning that is adala, even for the Talib al-Ilm, that he has to pay attention to this matter. That a matter that he should pay attention regarding is adala, and that factoring certain things regarding what is said about him by others from the Mashaykh, wa Talabat al-Ilm, not the Awam. Even at times the Awam, they might say different things, but being even more so, he has to be more so on his guard regarding how he's viewed and how he's looked upon by others from the Talabat al-Ilm of his era and of his time. And also the Mashaykh, that what they know of him and have come to know of him and his relationship with the Mashaykh, his teacher, the ones who are above him, and also that he himself, a Talib, that he has certain criteria. Of those criteria said of the ulama, that they only narrate upon people, transmit upon people, or they work with people who are thiqat, reliable. So those are things we said, lesson that we can learn of people of our generation, of our time, of being tuwailib, of the small students of knowledge that we learn from our kibar. So that's concerning adala al-rawat. This is concerning adala to rawat. So because they're becoming lengthy, we'll stop here and discuss the remaining 3 in the next session. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخرة والحمد لله آمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. How long was that one?